I will carry on. I mean, having a kind of small review of what we talked about in class, because many students, complained that they were not there, and they were not there during Ramadan. Okay, so the first phase, as I have just said, was characterized by, the appearance, the emergence of the sound pattern of English written by Chomsky and Halley in 1968. And this work, as I have just said, is, characterized by being the first, adequate account. It was the first adequate account of, the sound pattern of the English sound structure of English language, It was, successful in the sense that it, relied on satisfying, or it strived, let's say that it strived to satisfy, a number of criteria upon which any linguistic analysis is based and should strive to satisfy or meet. So let me, elaborate on these parameters or criteria. Number one is that any linguistic description, be it phonetic, phonological, morphological, syntactic, semantic in nature, should, strive to, meet or satisfy or the criterion of explanatory adequacy.
Your sound is lagging.
For all students or just for few students?
Yes, Professor.
Yes, Professor.
Your voice is not clear.
For for other students, it's clear. For other students, it's clear. Is it true or not?
It's clear.
Huh?
No. Yes, teacher, now it's clear.
Okay. So, explanatory adequacy. Explanatory adequacy is one tenet upon which any linguistic description is based. What does this explanatory adequacy mean? It basically means that any linguistic description should rely on observable facts. It should rely on scientific tools which are likely to be tested in any given language. So when we speak about scientific tools, we basically mean that we need scientific tools or procedures. We basically mean that we have to follow the path that many people concerned with the natural sciences follow, mainly to approach any given language or to deal with, to examine, to study the sound structure or any other aspect of linguistic analysis of any language. We have to rely on scientific observable tools, Basically, we should have a kind of hypothesis. We should develop a kind of hypothesis, and this hypothesis should be tested in the language under study. That is to say, in order to test this hypothesis, we should rely on collecting data using a number of measures and taking into consideration a number of factors, so that this hypothesis is going to be validated or invalidated. So when collecting data, we may rely on a number of procedures. We may use observation, we may use introspection, we may use questionnaire, interviewing, recording, and other strategies. What is important is that we are relying on scientific tools. or we do rely on scientific tools. We do not speak in the air. We do not rely only on our own intuitions in order to judge a given aspect of a given language. So suppose we are dealing with, the sound structure of a language. So we have to, make sure that we gather data which include sounds of that language. And this collection, of course, is going to be achievable, is going to be, realized through a number of strategies, as I have just mentioned them. Like, for instance, as I have just said, we may rely on observation. We may ask native speakers to provide us with such sounds, in which case it would be kind of a questionnaire or a recording, and so on. Then also, we have to, make sure that the analysis of the data is adequate enough to give us, reliable, outcomes, reliable outcomes. And then we have to, do justice to the state of being of things. That is to say, we have to describe, and we should not prescribe, as I told you before in semester 5. It's a matter of description. It's a matter of doing justice to things. We have no, right to interfere of the state of being of things. That is to say, what exists in a given language, but we have rather to describe it as it is, as it stands, as it is, or as it stands. And of course, we'll be coming up with findings. We'll be coming up with results for that language. And this is basically what Chomsky and Halley tried to achieve. If we said that, their work, the sound pattern of English, is, the most dominant one in its time, then it's because it could satisfy this criterion of explanatory adequacy. Because when you consult the original reference, what you will find that, we have, a speech about, the sounds of English in detail, a speech about, the characteristics of the sounds, and many other things. So this is the criterion of explanatory adequacy. Is it clear?
Yes, is it clear?
What about the other students? Is this criterion clear?
It's clear.
Explanatory adequacy. Clear?
Yes.
Good. The second criterion is economy. The second criterion is economy. Yeah. So any linguistic description, as I have just said, any linguistic description, as I have just said, be it phonetic, phonological, morphological, syntactic, or semantic in nature, should also strive to, satisfy this criterion of economy, in the sense that we should, use the least, rules, the least mechanisms to account for a huge number of phenomena. In this case, let me give you, one example, which is, of course, prevalent. It's extracted from the sound pattern of English itself. So if you still remember, we said before that in a number of languages, we have the phenomenon of nasalization. And of course, the environment for the realization of nasalization is going to vary from one language to another. Its environment of realization. That is to say, if we take the case of English, we find that vowels are nasalized when they are in the neighborhood of nasal consonants. In French, they are nasalized when they are after, for instance, nasal consonants. In other languages, they are nasalized when they are before nasal consonants. So you see, and same thing, in one language, we can have different environments for vowel nasalization. We can have different environments. So in this case, do you think, listen carefully, do you think that we have to give each environment, we have to account for each environment using one rule, or we have to think of a way of collapsing all the rules into one so that we try to achieve the criterion of economy? Is my question clear? Yes, please. Is it clear? Yes, I'm waiting for an answer. I'm waiting for an answer.
I don't understand why you talk about economy in this phase. I don't understand the question.
No, I'm not speaking about economy for this phase, Sabah. I'm speaking about economy and the other criteria I will be discussing, explanatory adequacy, economy, as criteria which should be satisfied in all linguistic descriptions, be they phonetic, phonological, morphological, syntactic, or semantic. Is it clear?
Okay,
These are criteria upon which linguistic description in general is based upon. Is it clear?
Okay, Professor, yes.
Then I'm waiting for an answer for the question I have just addressed. Yes, please.
Yes, we should
Mohammed.
rather, yes, we should rather have one comprehensive rule which applies to all instances.
Very good. In order to, abide by the criterion of economy. Yes, in order to abide by the criterion of economy. Because as you know, as we will see, in the file that is dealing with phonology, when we try to formulate phonological rules, we should look for all possibilities, and we have to achieve, we have to say the least, we have to say, we need to use formats which are economic in nature. We need to use formats which are economic in nature. If we take the case of nasalization, then we won't be writing each, rule for each environment, but we should collapse them into one rule that is going to be generalized. It's going to be generalized, in which case we will be using diacritics, we will be using variables, and we will be using a number of tools that we will be dealing with once speaking about the file that is devoted to phonology. Okay, then the third criterion is that of formality. So this is the most important criterion in any linguistic description. So if we claim that linguistic description is scientific in nature, it's because it is relying It is trying to, resemble, what takes place in natural sciences. That is to say, using algorithms, using formulas, using notations, using rules with variables, using alpha in writing rules, using beta, and so on. And this is a formality. That is to say, we should not account, or linguists are not, expected to, are not, supposed to account for linguistic changes using simply words, but they should look for ways to formalize the changes. That is to say, to give them a particular form. To be in the form of rules, notations, formalisms, algorithms, and so on. Okay? So we have so far, mentioned 3 different criteria that any linguistic description. So phonology, of course, the phonological, description is no exception, should abide to satisfy. Number 1, what's number 1? What is criterion number 1? Quickly, please. Quickly.
Explanatory adequacy.
Very good. Number 2.
Economy.
Number 3.
Formality.
Very good. Then, if the sound pattern of English was said to be successful in its time, it's because it tried to abide by these 3 different criteria, so that when you consult this reference, you will find adequate explanations for the sound pattern of English. You will find a characterization, for instance, of phonemes in terms of their distinctive features. You will find a ramification, a modification of a number of distinctive features. Unlike what was said before, you will find the rules dealing with different processes in English language. You will find an account of exceptions, because to each rule we may have exceptions. But what is dangerous, it's not the case of there is no harm in having exceptions, I'm sorry. But what is harmful is when you fail to account for such exceptions. Then the sound pattern of English also succeeded in accounting for such exceptions. He also succeeded in establishing 2 different levels of representing words and morphemes, which we spoke about in class, which are the underlying level, which is also called the phonological or phonemic level of representation, and the phonetic one. It also succeeded in showing the relationship that exists between these 2 different levels. And we said in class that it is a mapping relationship. It's a mapping relationship in the sense that we have to apply rules in order to move from the underlying level to the phonetic one. It also succeeded in, giving explanations for the fact that, or elaborating on the fact that, phonological rules should respect a rigid ordering. It's not, they should not be thought of as being unordered, but they do respect a rigid ordering. The sound pattern of English also proved successful to the extent that it could account for that connection, that interface that exists between phonology and morphology, which was referred to as morphophonemics. And I gave you an example for that when we spoke about the plural marking. the plural marking, attachment, and the changes which it activates. So those changes are phonological in nature, even if we have a morphological operation, but the changes are phonological in nature. So all these things were spoken about in the sound pattern of English in an adequate, economic, formal way. Adequate, economic, formal way. Still, the sound pattern of English couldn't escape, criticism. So that much criticism was leveled at the sound pattern of English for a number of reasons. And we already stated those reasons. Among those reasons is that the sound pattern of English couldn't, recognize, suprasegmental structure. That is to say, structure that is superior than the segment, which is larger than the segment. For instance, yes, Osama, do you want to say something, Osama?
No, ma'am, just clicked the button. That's it. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, the sound pattern of English, as I have been saying, failed to recognize, the existence of suprasegmental units, such as the syllable, such as the stress foot, such as the, prosodic word, for instance, and the intonational phrase. Because of this failure, it also failed to account for, a number of suprasegmental features. And I give you the example of stress. Stress couldn't be adequately dealt with in the sound pattern of English because it is basically associated. It's tightly linked to the suprasegmental unit, which is the syllable. So for this, reason and other reasons, linguists in general and phonologists in particular started questioning the nature of phonological representations, which were basically linear in nature. They were linear in nature. In the sound pattern of English, phonological representations were linear in nature. Linguists in general and phonologists in particular started questioning the nature of those linear representations and claimed that it's not enough to, have one level of phonological representation, but representation should be rather hierarchical. They should be rather hierarchical in nature in order to be able to account for a number of, prosodic features and other phenomena, of course, not only in phonology, but also in morphology, because, this fact of having hierarchical representations is going to contaminate, also the domain of morphology, not only, phonology, okay? And this criticism, was fruitful indeed, because it, culminated in the emergence of a number of nonlinear theories of phonological analysis or phonological representations. So who would like to remind us of these, nonlinear theories of phonological representations? Quickly, please, quickly. Abdelmoula.
I will talk about the metrical phonology, that it's exclusively dealing with the Swiss patterns. It involves the throat, the syllable, the mora, and the prosodic.
Metrical phonology. Very good. So among these theories, we have metrical phonology. Now I'm shifting to the second phase. Your attention, please. I'm shifting to the second phase. Yes? I'm shifting to the second phase, which is characterized by the emergence of nonlinear theories of phonological representation or phonological analysis. And among these theories, we have metrical phonology, advocated by Lieberman and Prince in 1977, by Selkirk 1982, by Hayes 1983, among many other, Macaulay, Hogg and Macaulay 1987, among other, phonologists. So, this theory of metrical phonology is exclusively concerned with stress patterns. It is exclusively concerned with stress patterns, and it is totally different from what has been, claimed in the sound pattern of English. Because in this, theory, as I told you before, stress is no longer conceived of as being a discrete feature of vowels like any other feature, but it is rather viewed as relative prominence. As relative prominence, it's relational in nature. It's relational in nature, in that it expresses relations of prominence among syllable constituents. So that in the second phase, phonologists in the late 70s and late 18s, phonologists started speaking about a prosodic hierarchy, a universal prosodic hierarchy. Universal prosodic hierarchy. Who would like to remind us of this universal prosodic hierarchy and its constituents or components? Quickly, please. Prosodic hierarchy. What is it? What is its prosodic hierarchy? We already dealt with this in class. Quickly, please. What is the prosodic hierarchy? What is the prosodic hierarchy?
Professor?
Yes, Abdelmoula.
So in prosodic hierarchy, it's argued that the syllable is being the stress bearing unit, and there is a close relationship between the syllable and the vowel, in that the vowel is the core unit of the syllable, without which we cannot have a syllable. And also talk about the mora, that is related to the minimal and maximal expression of the syllable.
Yes, Abdelmoula.
Yes, Professor.
Your attention. Yes, that what you are saying is true. But if you are asked to define the prosodic hierarchy, you should claim that it is a hierarchy on which prosodic, units are scaled. Prosodic units are scaled from top to bottom or from bottom to top. Now you are starting from the bottom, Abdelmoula. You are starting from the bottom. Yes, you agree with me.
Yes, Professor. Yeah, starting from.
So if starting from the bottom, then we should first mention the mora. Yes.
So speak about the mora. So the mora is we say it's related.
The mora then.
Can I define it, Professor?
Yeah.
So the mora is related to the minimal and the maximal expression of syllable. So when we
what
say
is it first? Abdelmoula, what is the mora first? You should claim that the mora is a prosodic unit which measures syllable weight. This is the definition of the mora. The mora is a prosodic unit, and it's the lowest unit of the prosodic hierarchy, the lowest unit of the prosodic hierarchy, which measures syllable weight. It measures syllable weight. So that, Abdelmoula, when speaking about syllable weight, so what's the distinctions that we should make in relation to the mora?
Professor?
Yes, Abdelmoula.
It means whether a syllable is light, open syllable, is light mean open syllable ending in a short vowel, or a heavy, it means open syllable ending in a long vowel or a closed syllable.
Then how many moras would we have for a light syllable?
One mora.
And for a heavy syllable?
2 moras.
Very good. Then moving to the next, prosodic unit. What is it? Iman. What is the next prosodic unit in the hierarchy? Iman.
Stress and unstressed syllable.
No, please. Abdelmoula, what's the next prosodic unit?
The syllable?
Yes, good. Yes, the syllable. It's the syllable. So, if asked to define the syllable, how would you define it then? Definition of the syllable unit as the next prosodic unit, please.
Professor, the syllable is always defined in relation to the vowel as being the core unit of it.
Yes, the syllable is the second unit of the prosodic hierarchy. That is, it has a core unit, which is the vowel. That is, it has a peak of sonority. I will explain this. It has a peak of sonority, which is the vowel. It has a peak of sonority, which is the vowel, which is surrounded by increasing and decreasing valleys of sonority. Let me repeat this definition. The syllable is the next unit of the prosodic hierarchy, which has a peak of sonority, which is surrounded by increasing and decreasing valleys of sonority. When we speak about the peak, which has a high degree of sonority, we are speaking about the vowel. And when we speak about the surrounding valleys, which have increasing and decreasing sonority, we are speaking about the onset and the coda. The onset and the coda. So I will elaborate on this later on. What you should bear in mind in this definition is this definition. The next higher prosodic unit is what? The next higher prosodic unit is what? Abdelmoula.
So we also speak about syllable that is organized into stress foot, which is a prosodic unit.
Yes, the next higher prosodic unit is the stress foot. Then what is the stress foot? What is the stress foot?
Is a prosodic unit made
is represented as prosodic stress foot is represented as prosodic unit which is made up of stressed and unstressed syllable.
Very good. It's a prosodic unit that is higher than the syllable, which is made up of stressed and unstressed syllables. Stressed and unstressed syllables. Yes. The next prosodic unit in the hierarchy.
So the intentional phrase.
No.
I think we stop
prosodic
here.
word.
Very good.
Phonological
Neriman. Yes, Neriman. It is the
Prosodic word.
very good. It's the prosodic word. So if asked to define this prosodic word, how would you define it then? According to the prosodic hierarchy. Yes. Yes, please. I'm waiting for an answer, please.
Yes, sir.
Abdelmoula.
We see that it is a constituent and that is higher than the syllable and the foot, but lower than intentional phrase and phonological phrase.
What's the function of this unit? Yes, we know that on the prosodic hierarchy, it is higher than the stress foot, and lower than the phonological phrase, the intonational. The intonational phrase. So the function of the prosodic word is to combine. It's to combine. Stress feet and any stray syllables. So you have to bear this in mind. So the function of the prosodic word, is to combine stress feet and any stranded or stray syllables. That is to say, syllables which remain unattached to certain feet. Then it's going to combine these syllables under the node, which is called the prosodic word. The next and the higher unit of the prosodic hierarchy is the intonational phrase. So if asked to define this intonational phrase, how would you define it then? Yes. What about the intonational phrase, which is the highest prosodic unit on the prosodic hierarchy, the universal? Sorry. How would you define the intonational phrase, please? Yes, I'm waiting for an answer. Please, quickly. You are wasting time.
So I think the last session we started at stressful. So, why?
Abdelmoula. And this is not addressed only to Abdelmoula, it's to all students. So bear in mind that in linguistic courses, sessions, you need to use your critical skills. You should not, content yourselves only with what the professor says, but you have to, reflect on what is being said. Is clear or not? Is it clear or not?
Yes, it's clear.
So, if it is called, and for all students, if it is called the intonational phrase, does this mean that it would be dealing with the word level or the phrase level?
It will be dealt with phrase level. So.
Of course. Yes, of course. Then you could claim that the intonational phrase is, the largest prosodic unit in that it would be dealing with the phrase level. For instance, if we take the case of stress, we do not only have word stress, we also have phrase stress. When dealing with phrase stress, we would disregard these prosodic units, which are called the mora, the syllable, and stress foot, and we'll simply content ourselves with the phrasal level. Then a simple definition that we could give to the intonational phrase is that it is the highest prosodic unit that is basically and exclusively concerned with the phrase level to account for prosodic phenomena. Is it clear?
Professor, could you repeat the definition of international phrase, please?
The intonational phrase is basically dealing with the phrasal level to account for a number of prosodic phenomena. I would like to add the fact that the prosodic hierarchy, the universal prosodic hierarchy, we already spoke about in class, and we have tried to elaborate on in this virtual session, is motivated by a very important universal principle, which is called the prosodic licensing principle, which is advocated by Otto Jenko in 1998. I will repeat this. The prosodic hierarchy we have been elaborating on, which is universal. It means that it holds for all languages. It accounts for almost all languages of the world, is motivated by a principle that is, which is also universal, that is referred to as the prosodic licensing principle. The prosodic licensing principle, which is advocated by Ito Janko in 1998. So then, what is the content of this, prosodic licensing principle? What is its content? What does it say? What does it claim? What does it stand for? So this prosodic licensing principle simply states that each lower prosodic unit is licensed by a higher one. Each lower prosodic unit is licensed by a higher one. So let's try to apply this to the prosodic hierarchy we have been speaking about so far in this second phase, which is basically saying that, or it says that the syllable unit licenses the mora. We cannot claim that the mora licenses the syllable. No, it's the syllable which licenses the mora. Or we can claim that the mora is licensed by the syllable unit. The mora is licensed by the syllable unit, or the syllable licenses moras. And same thing for the stress foot. The stress foot licenses stressed syllables, stress
Professor,
and
what do you mean
unstressed.
by this licenses?
It projects, simply. Okay?
Okay, Professor.
Projects into, or licenses. Okay, so the stressed feet do license stressed and unstressed syllables. The prosodic word licenses or projects onto stressed feet and stray and joined syllables, disjoined syllables. And the intonational phrase in turn licenses prosodic words. Okay, is this clear?
Professor,
Sabah.
I have a question whether we have this in the book or not.
No, what I'm saying, this session does not exist in the reference, please. This general introduction is my own, and you have to pay attention to it because you will surely have questions, addressed, from this general introduction. Is it clear, Sabah?
Okay, Professor, thank you.
Okay. So what do we call this principle then we have been speaking about? What do we call it? What do we call the principle we have been speaking about?
Prosodic licensing principle.
Prosodic? What? Iman? Prosodic?
Licensing, no?
Very good. Licensing.
Yes.
ING. It ends with
Yes.
ING. The prosodic licensing principle. Who advocated, this principle?
Ito and Jack, 1888. Am I right?
Ito Janko. Okay, very good. Then it's clear for this prosodic licensing principle. Okay, what about other theories? So far we have been speaking about metrical phonology. What about autosegmental phonology? What about autosegmental phonology? Sabah?
It deals with tonal phenomena in African language, as you told us before.
Okay, so is it linear or non-linear in nature, this treatment?
Non-linear.
Yes. So let me, give you some, give you more ideas about, tonal hierarchical representations within autosegmental phonology. So before, the emergence of nonlinear autosegmental phonology, tone was also conceived of as being a feature of vowels, like stress. Okay. And of course, it's also, it couldn't be dealt with adequately. With the coming of autosegmental phonology, tone is represented as separate from the vowels. So that tonal representations are represented on different tiers, so that you will have a layer, or we will have a tier on which we have vowels and consonants, and another tier on which we have tones, such as high tone, mid tone, low tone. And these tones are going to be associated. They are going to be associated with vowels. We will have association lines. We will have a kind of association lines. So if you simply go to Google and you insert autosegmental representations, and you will have an idea about such representations, the way tone became represented within autosegmental phonology. Is it clear?
Yes, clear, Professor.
We also had the emergence of syllable structure theory. So that many phonologists started speaking about, as we discussed that in class, about the minimal and maximal expansion of the syllable, tomplatic templatic representation of the syllable. That is to say, we will represent the minimal representation, the minimal expansion of the syllable on a tree, as we can represent its maximal, expansion on a syllable tree, And these are referred to as templates. We refer to them as templates. So a template is basically a tree on which we try to represent the minimal as well as the maximal expansion of the syllable. Phonologists also started speaking about syllable inventories. We saw some of these in class, like, for instance, having canonic forms, canonic patterns such as V, CV, VC, CCV, CVCC, CVCCC, VCCC, CV, that is to say with a long vowel or with a long diphthong, among other canonic patterns. Okay? So this syllable structure was also, categorized as being nonlinear in nature, because we have hierarchical representations of the syllable. The syllable can never be represented as being linear, but it should be represented as on a hierarchical structure, on a tree basically. And this representation could have solved a number of problems related to stress patterns, problems related to other phenomena, which do not concern us here. Okay? So we should not, deny the fact that, these nonlinear theories enjoyed success for a long period of time. But like any, other, account or approach, they also couldn't escape, criticism. And criticism basically directed to, nonlinear theories was concerned with the fact that these theories could not, dispense with this fact of having well-formedness representations, that is to say representations on which we try to state well-formed and ill-formed structures. They also couldn't do without rules. So they adhere to rules, and they were also convinced about the fact that we have an underlying and a phonetic representation, and we have the application of rules. So phonologists started questioning. They started, questioning, the utility of having, this distinction between an underlying representation and a phonetic one, an input and an output. Okay? So they started arguing for the fact that we can do without. Yes, Sabah. What's the problem, Sabah?
Nothing, Professor, I'm sorry.
I have been saying that phonology started, questioning, the possibility of doing without rules, without phonological rules, doing without well-formedness conditions, and they started, celebrating. They started celebrating, a new, theory. They started celebrating a new way of looking at phonological phenomena in different languages. And this new way, this new outlook, let's say, is characterized by, the defense of what we refer to as constraints. Instead of having rules, instead of having well-formedness conditions, we'll be operating with constraints, simply with constraints. So here we will be shifting. There was a shift from the second phase to the third phase. as we said before, which was basically characterized by the emergence of what is still dominant, phonological analysis, which is OT or optimality theory, OT or optimality theory. And this theory, as I told you before, is based on a number of premises or tenets. It's based on a number of premises or tenets. So the first tenet or premise is the fact that we have a generator. We have one generator only. We do not have an input and an output, but we rather have one generator. And this generator is going to generate a number of candidates. It's going to generate a number of candidates, so that we will have candidate number 2, we will have candidate number 1, candidate number 2, 3, and we can reach candidate N. And the candidate that is going to win is the one that is going to have the least violations of constraints, because constraints, according to this theory, optimality theory, are universal as well as language particular. Constraints are universal as well as language particular. When we speak about universal constraints, if we simply take the case of the syllable weight, to give you one example, if we take the case of syllable weight, it is claimed within OT that a universal constraint is that we can't have more than 2 moras for a given syllable. We can't have more than 2 moras, which means that we can have 1 or 2 moras, but we can't have more. Then this is a universal constraint. It's a universal constraint. For language particular constraints, it means these are constraints which apply to only a number of languages, but do not hold true for other languages. Let me give you one example for language particular constraints. If we consider the case of English language, we said before that one constraint is that we can have onsetless syllables. So this constraint could be written in saying English language tolerates onsetless syllables. English language tolerates onsetless syllables. Or it can be put in the form of in a formal way. We can put it in a formal way. So these are examples of both universal and language particular constraints. So what's really important for this theory is that it proved to be very successful because it approximates universality. It could approximate universality, which linguistic theory is trying to is striving to achieve. It's trying hard to achieve universality. So this theory is tunable and applicable to almost all languages of the world. So it is still the most dominant theory in phonology. And as I told you before, it was first advocated by McCarthy and Smolinski, McCarthy and Prince and Selkirk, Hayes and McCarthy, in the 1990s, that is to say 1993, 1994, 1995, 1996, 2000s, and so on. Okay. What's also important about this theory is that it's now also applicable to both morphology and syntax. It's a theory that's really proved to be so powerful and adequate to account for the interfaces or the links that exists between phonology and morphology, and also between morphology and syntax. Morphology and syntax. Okay. So as I told you before, when we had face-to-face classes, I told you that it's really difficult to cross the borders. We can't cross the borders of the first phase or the second phase to deal only with the third phase, because if you do not know about, if you are not well informed about the first and second phases, you can't understand what's happening in the third phase. The complexities of the third phase. Yeah, so that we, as we said before, content ourselves simply with the linear account of phonological phenomena, the linear account of phonological phenomena. And as you could notice in the reference, please, your attention, as you could notice in the reference, we had a second file. We have a second file that is entitled phonemics. So in this file, you will find, the writer's willingness to familiarize you with what happened before the coming or before the emergence of the sound pattern of English. What happened before the emergence or coming of the sound pattern of English? Okay?
Yes, Professor.
Okay. So please, could you, consider page 57. 57, please. Yes? Is it okay?
Yes, Professor.
Okay. So it is said that the study of speech has always been influenced by the predominant philosophy of its time. So until late in the 18th century, linguists concentrated on the study of sound change. So you still remember that distinction that we made in the semester 5 between diachronic analysis and synchronic analysis. I would like to remind us of this difference between synchronic analysis and diachronic analysis of linguistic phenomena. Synchronic analysis and diachronic one.
Professor?
Yes, Osama.
I think synchronic it focus on the nouns of language at a particular time, and for the diachronic it focus on the traditional linguistic.
What do you mean by traditional linguistics? What do you mean by traditional linguistics, Mr. Osama? Abdelmoula?
Diachronic studies the language through its historical development and evolution, and synchronic studies the language at a particular point of time.
Yeah, that's good. So then, in the late of the 18th century, linguists basically were concerned with the sound change. They only dealt with the sound structure of languages, but in a diachronic way. It's not in a synchronic way, but in a diachronic way, in that the object of their study was written manuscripts of related human languages. they basically, try to analyze, families of languages or language families. For instance, in the European languages, and many other languages. So the goal of their study was twofold. So the purpose was, twofold. To reconstruct language families and to determine the laws regulating the changes that sounds undergo through time. And this is the point. The focus was not synchronic, as the Chomsky and Halley did in the sound pattern of English, because the analysis in the sound pattern of English is synchronic. It is synchronic. It's not diachronic, because they are they dealt with one language, which is English language, and they were concerned with English language at a particular period of time. They didn't devote any speech, to the relation of English to other languages or the changes that may have happened on the English language. This is the point. So this linguist dealt with language change in a diachronic manner or in a diachronic way. So in which case they were influenced by the mechanical philosophy, what was referred to at that time as mechanical or automatic, mechanical philosophy, which claims that everything in nature is subject to mechanical change, and that language is no exception. The type of the study of speech is part of the discipline called comparative philology. Comparative philology. The study of the history of language, since it compares the historical diachronic states of related languages. It's clear. Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, it's clear for me.
Now, there is a shift, to a speech about structural linguistics or structuralist linguists. And it is said that the structuralist linguists were influenced by the philosophy of Durkheim, who changed the focus from language families to the sound structure of individual languages. Then what does it mean? It means that it is thanks to structural, linguistics or structuralist linguists that we had this shift from diachronic analysis to a analysis of the sound structure of individual languages. And they were, of course, in doing so, they were influenced by the philosophy of Durkheim. Yes. Then the object of study for the structuralists is a set of spoken utterances called corpus. This is very important. This key term of corpus is very important. You should pay attention to this, please. There is a difference between corpus and data. Do you have an idea about this? There is a difference because some people may use them interchangeably. That is to say, they may be using data and corpus interchangeably, but still there is a difference between the two. Do you have any idea about this?
No, Professor.
Then it's a question for next session, please. I would like you to give me a clear, definition between a clear definition, making distinction between corpus and data for next time. Is it clear?
Yes, Professor. Okay.
Yes,
So
Professor.
called corpus, and the goal of studying data is to determine the sound system of an individual language. An individual language, as of course Chomsky and Halley did in the sound pattern of English. But structuralism before, generativism, structuralism before generativism had its own way of dealing with the sound structure of individual languages. It's not like the generative approach, but it's different. And we will see what makes the difference in this part of this, book, in file 2. So, the notion of a system was introduced. Language as a system. We all the time use this notion. Language is a system. Language is a system of rules. Language is a system of signs. Language is a system of conventionalized signs that is used for the purpose of communication. So this notion of system was introduced by Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure to refer to what? System for him, for de Saussure, is an organized related group of elements. An organized related group of elements along with a set of statements for choosing among those elements. So this is the definition of system for structuralist linguists, and particularly for de Saussure. System is an organized related group of elements along with a set of statements for choosing among those elements. So then the analysis of data is inspired by the positivist view that requires experimental techniques. This is very important. We have a positivist approach which claims that experimental techniques do determine sound structure. Is this clear? Yes, are you still here, students? Dear students, are you still here?
Yes, Professor.
Professor, I have.
Okay, so I have been saying that this is a shift. This is a shift from stating or giving impressionistic statements. That is to say, simply impressions, just giving impressions about languages and the changes they underwent, through time, to authentic, let's say, to an authentic analysis of the sound structure of languages, because we will be using verifiable and experimental techniques, so that the structuralist approach was started by Ferdinand de Saussure in Europe. This is an idea about the one school of linguistic thought, which is structuralism. It was started by Ferdinand de Saussure in Europe and developed further by Leonard Bloomfield in North America. Okay? And do you know, the monumental work of Ferdinand de Saussure? What's the title of his, monumental work? What is its title in French? Do you have any idea about this? The title of the book he could, publish. It's not, Ferdinand who published it, but after his death, his students, combined, they gathered his lectures and tried to, put them into one published work, which is entitled Les cours de linguistique générale. Les cours de linguistique générale. It's translated into English. Les cours de linguistique générale, written by Dossosier. Okay? Then the structuralists admit only one level of linguistic analysis, namely surface structure. This is one big difference between structuralism and generativism. If you still remember, we said before that for, Chomsky and Halley, we have two levels of, representing words and for morphemes to account for, sound structure of a given language. We have an underlying level and the phonetic one or surface level. But for the structuralists, they were convinced that they had only one level of linguistic analysis, and it's basically the surface structure. It's basically the surface structure. That is, they analyze speech as it is produced. They analyze speech as it is produced. That is to say, they deal with the actual level of speech, the actual level of pronunciation. They do not, relate, this actual level of phonetic realization to an abstract mental representation. Perceived and transcribed. They analyze speech as it is produced, perceived, and transcribed. Answers to any questions relating to language should find support in the data. Answers to any questions relating to a language should find support in the data. That is to say, you should only deal with the data that is in front of your hands or in front of your eyes or, between your hands without trying to look for other, explanations. Otherwise, the analysis is not valid. This is one important feature of structuralism or structuralist, analysis. Analysis referring to abstract. You turn over the page, please. Turn on the page. Analysis referring to abstract, invisible entities, that is to say underlying representations, are not admissible in the structuralist paradigm. They are not admissible in the structuralist paradigm. The remainder of this file would outline the structuralist analysis of sound structure of different languages. So the remainder of this file is going to outline the structuralist analysis of the sound structure of, languages. So it means that it's going to, try to familiarize you, making you familiar with the convictions, with the, procedures of the structuralist approach to, the study of the sound structure of, different languages. Okay, so the sounds of language. What are? Yeah. Yes, Abdelmoula. Abdelmoula.
Can I ask a question? So why the structures are concerned with the pronunciation, but not with the main?
Your sound is lagging, Abdelmoula. The sound is lagging. I can't hear you. Could you repeat your question, Abdelmoula?
I said, Professor, why structures are not?
Same problem. You still have the same problem. Your voice is lagging. Yes, Abdelmoula.
Is my voice clear now, Professor?
No, it's still lagging.
So go ahead, Professor.
Yes, yes. Mula, try it again, please. Try it again.
I just want to ask a question about structural are only concerned with the actual representation, with actual pronunciation, but not with the mental representation.
So they did not, it's simply for the reason that they did not go deeply. They couldn't go deeply into dealing with a number of phenomena. And once, speaking about, generative approach, once speaking about, because this is mentioned in this file, it's part of this file. We will see the weaknesses of, the structuralist approach. I don't like to anticipate. This is one of the weaknesses indeed. It's one of the weaknesses of, because they missed, the existence of, because they couldn't recognize the existence of an underlying level of representation, that they could not account for a number of processes existing in English language and at play, let's say, in English and in other languages. Is it clear, Abdelmoula? Okay. So, according to structuralists, this is a very important question. What are the sounds of a language? What are the sounds of a language? How are they phonetically realized? So, and how are they distributed? So these are three pertinent questions. These are three pertinent questions for which the structuralists try to find an answer. These are three pertinent, relevant questions for which structuralists tried to provide an answer. Number one, what are the sounds of a language? Number two, how are sounds phonetically realized? And number three, how are they distributed? So these are the main questions structuralists set to answer, laying out as objective the determination of the sound structure of a language. The sound structure of a language. So then, to determine the sounds of a language, the structuralists proceed along the following lines. So we will, try to show to you, the procedures, which are followed by structuralists in order to determine the sounds of a language. Of course, the corpus is used from British English. The corpus used is from British English into one, which are classified, the words are classified within the structuralist model. We are following the same approach. The structuralists, this is the way they, present it, the way they, present it, okay? I think that I will stop here. Your attention, please, dear students. I will be, recording a number of audios trying to explain the content of this file, basically the whole file. I will be explaining, elaborating, giving examples, other examples if possible, on separate audios, which would be made available for you on the platform. They would be made available for you on the platform. Because, for the remaining virtual sessions, I would like to, go, straightforwardly to the file that is dealing with phonology. It's number 4, file number 4. And of course, once explaining the content of this file on audios, which you will receive as soon as possible, I would like you to listen to them carefully. Try to listen to them carefully and try to note. If ever you have questions, try to note them down. Try to note them down so that we can, discuss them together. Is it clear?
Yes, Professor.
Okay, so then let's call it a day and looking forward to meeting you on Friday for the session on discourse analysis. Your attention, please. Same thing would be done for discourse analysis. I will be also recording a number of audios in which I will be explaining, elaborating, adding, new things for, discourse analysis. And they also would be available for you on the platform. Is it clear?
Inshallah, Professor.
They are available in the platform, or you are still preparing them?
No, I'm still in the process of preparing them. But you will receive everything before the 4th, inshallah. You will receive everything, okay, before the 4th, okay?
Yes, Professor. Thank you.
Okay, so let's call it a day and looking forward to meeting you on our next virtual session on Friday, inshallah. Goodbye.